All right, welcome to Simple Healthy Life, where our goal is to have insightful, real discussions on topics that we find interesting. And you knew it was coming. You knew it was. Everyone knows it's coming. We need to talk a little bit about AI, and I think I've been thinking about this topic for a while. Obviously, because it's kind of like flavor of the month, flavor of the year, but also because I think that I have a little different view on it than some other people. And with every technological innovation, there is always this what seems like a vast majority of people who are like, this is bad for this reason, right? But I think we're at the point with ChatGPT and all the other extensions and other kind of like large language models where it obviously is kind of inevitable, and it's so good at certain things that it is quite foolish in my eyes to neglect the importance that it might have over the next, or definitely will have over the next couple years. And I think we're in this awkward stage because it's not very good at everything, but it excels in a lot of different small things. And I do think we need to learn about how to best optimize the use for that in our daily life. And so I guess for you, what's been your experience with large language models like ChatGPT, and how have you been using it in your day-to-day?
Well, if I could back up a step,
Mm-hmm.
because I have a question.
Sure.
The large language model concept, right? So AI, artificial intelligence, right? Non-human intelligence is what it's saying. Am I wrong to think that when you used to put in Google, when you put in the Google machine and you started typing, let's say you were like, use one that everybody might know, like pizza places near me, right? And you start typing in pizza places, did you notice that it comes up with like in the ghosted near me or top rated or whatever? Isn't that essentially what we're talking about?
Yeah, I think those like kind of predictive models have been around for a while. I think the distinction is that it's not necessarily like a large language model, and I'm not an AI expert. Although I will say I do spend a lot of time learning about it. So take it for what you will. But I think the difference is that the AI models now can not just be predictive, but they can use and understand the language, which is much different than what we've had in the past, where Google's kind of like predictive model was just more so like, what do people typically search for? And when you look up pizza shops near me, it happens to be 95% of the time, this topic is searched. And so I think that's a little different than a model like in AI that can actually understand what you say and can actually understand all the information it has access to and put it together in a very coherent way. So I think that's the distinction between like now versus back then.
You know what? That makes sense to me because when you ask me how I use AI, or ChatGPT specifically, it's the only one that I use right now. An example would be I was asking it to give me an outline on a topic. And I said something to the effect of, I'm giving a speech tomorrow, and the speech has to be 10 minutes long, and I need to incorporate these three elements, and I would like a story involved. Can you please give me an outline so I can work at it? And it did that, which to me, that was kind of like the same concept of predictive, right? It's like I essentially put in pizza places and it was like near me. And then I was like, give me these examples, these parameters. And it was like, okay, this is how to do it. What really blew my mind and continues to blow my mind is when it gives it back to me and then I say something, I just literally type in, okay, but do it different. And then it just does it completely different.
Yeah.
That's what you mean when you say like it does understand language.
Right.
Yeah.
It understands the task, and it completes the task, right? And I think the things that have come up in a lot of ways for this conversation is, well, it kind of removes the aspect of critical thinking, which, yeah, I think it does a lot of things really well, and I think obviously it you could say, write me my school essay, and it would probably do it better than you can in a lot of ways. And so, what does that mean for the art of critical thinking, which I think is a valid argument, because I don't think it's super helpful to remove that skill from use. But as I continue to work with it in different ways, I understand that you can actually implement a lot of like critical thinking and like prompt engineering into these, like ChatGPT specifically, and that is where our interaction takes place right now, and that's where I think the most room for improvement is for most of us. It's not the fact that like, yeah, I can do the job well and we can put in a basic prompt and it can throw something out, but we need to coherently and optimally provide it prompts so that we're getting exactly the output that we want.
So, okay, so as you're talking, I'm realizing what my challenge is, because we had kind of talked about this before, and I was saying like, it doesn't really work for me because it almost gives me the information too quickly, and I don't take it in. I can regurgitate is a weird word to use, but I could give it back to you. You could say, okay, I could say, give me some topic, and then I'll put it in ChatGPT, and then I'll read about it, and then I'll say, okay, this, I get it, I understand. But I'm going to take us back for a bit. I'm old enough to remember the Dewey Decimal System. I know I'm going way back, and I apologize to all the readers.
We learned that.
Yeah.
I learned that.
I actually didn't learn it. I put my foot in the ground and was like, I'm not learning the Dewey Decimal System. Which, when over here to my librarian teacher, we didn't get along. As you can imagine, I was a tough 12-year-old. But essentially what would happen is when we first started doing this, or when I first started having to produce information that other people would need to read or understand, I would have to go and get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different books, right? And I would base that on topic, or however I would base it, or author or whatever. And then I would need to read enough of that book to be able to write down what I wanted to put into my essay or to my report or whatever the case would be, right? Now, fast forward, we don't have to do that anymore. What we needed was to go to X amount of websites on the Google machine, right? But essentially, we'd still have to read through their website to say, okay, this is the information that I'm looking for, and if you're doing a good job, you would validate that through whatever secondary purpose you want. But now, you don't have to do any of that, right? So when you say critical thinking, now you don't have to read through the book and pull out the information that makes sense. You don't have to read through the website and pull out the information that makes sense. And you don't have to do any of that. You just have to put it in a way that makes sense to you and let it spit it back out. And I think that's my challenge. It's a really long way to get at that. But my challenge is now I'm not learning this information. I'm just reading it and sending it back out.
Right.
So I don't know what the next step might be for me. Is it to do that 6 or 7 times like I would anyways, and have it come up differently 6 or 7 times, and then I can retain the information? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly understanding, how to use it, right? I don't think the problem is new by all, when you put it that way, right? Like, for most of, probably most people who are listening to this, and most people who are live right now, you type in the answer, you type in a question into Google, and you're finding one of the top 3 ranked search engine results, and you're honestly taking most of your information from that anyways. So we all are probably in some way being guided and or misguided by Google already. It's essentially the same thing the way that I think about it. Sure, in theory, it would be nice, like, type my question in, and then go through each thing and like evaluate but I don't think people do that. I think they find whatever supports their current thesis, and just see this number 1 on Google told me this, and I think it's just human nature to not want to put in the effort to like critically think, right? And so I don't necessarily think the problem of like critical thinking and learning and effort is a new one. I think it's one that we've been challenged with as far as the internet goes for a long period of time. And so, in terms of like AI, what the beautiful thing that you can do is you can tailor it to what you need. So, write me an outline that covers X topic, and help me chunk it up into learnable bits or whatever. Like obviously that's not a great prompt, but the general meat of the prompt is something like that. And then it will spit out things in a way, okay, I want you to learn, boom. And then it does its thing. And then it spits out another prompt. And, I think again, the way to move forward in a healthy way with that kind of access to information is tailoring it to what you need, as opposed to saying, well, I just don't learn from it, so it doesn't work. The beautiful thing that is different than Google is that you can customize it to exactly what you need, to the exact type of style that you like. And you could probably even ask it to illustrate diagrams that demonstrate a particular topic, or give me books that talk about a specific topic, or give me some ideas and then journal prompts that help me guide my own learning, or teach me, hey, what is the best way to learn this topic, and then have it run through each thing. I want to learn guitar. Give me three beginner intro steps that I can implement and start doing that will help me get into guitar, right? Which are not things that we can actually do super well with, Google. I mean, we can do that kind of stuff with YouTube, but this way of attaining that information and have it disseminated is just so much faster. It's so fast.
So help me understand this, because I don't. It tells me that it doesn't go on the internet, right? So I'm like, hey, tell me something about yesterday, and it responds back with, look, I don't go on the internet, but here's something that could be true or plausible.
Yeah.
So what does it do? So are we interacting with just a massive database?
So it I think for ChatGPT specifically, it cuts off at like certain dates. I know at first, when it first came out, it had access to internet information prior to like 2020, and then it updates with every subsequent update to ChatGPT. It has a different kind of cutoff. I don't know exactly where the cutoff is, so it doesn't do a great job at real time events, but I don't know, the line seems kind of wishy-washy, because certain things it understands, and certain things it doesn't understand, or doesn't have access to. But I think that's more of like a limitation on like the server side of ChatGPT specifically, because there's AI now in Google, right? Like you search anything now, at least as far as all my searches, and there's an AI synopsis of most of the information. Which is kind of interesting.
So does it scare you at all? I was going to give an example of why it scares me, but I'll just ask you, does it scare you at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's again, I mean, phones are scary. Internet's scary, right? Like all new things are somewhat scary. You're not necessarily sure like where that goes, right? I think a lot of people are potentially concerned with the fact that they might lose their job, and I think it's a fair fear. It's a fair apprehension. So I think there are things that are scary about it, but it's one of those things where why worry about it when it's happening? It's already a thing. There's no need in being apprehensive, because we've already passed the point of no return with it, and so you might as well just use it for what it's good at. You might as well adapt rather than trying to resist it. But yeah, what are you fearful of?
So I'm fearful that essentially what I think is happening is there's at least some level of human programming or teaching this thing. They keep saying like, we're teaching our large language model. And I think even when you use ChatGPT, it's saying by using this, it's learning from you, right? So it's learning what people are asking. It's learning whether or not the response was good, and but it still has to be loaded with information, right? Whether it just doesn't scan the internet at will, I don't think. So somehow, like, we saw that Google Gemini came back with like the Nazis were various races and ethnicities, which we know not to be true.
Right.
Thankfully, we know that wasn't true, because if we didn't, we would just take that as, oh my goodness, that's the way it was.
Yeah.
And it was done, I think, with the right intention, right? They were trying to make sure that every race and gender was represented, and I'm not knocking them for their intention, but what it came back with was stuff that just wasn't true. Right. So what happens if we don't put in the right information? What happens if we didn't load it properly? That's my first fear. My second fear is what happens when we just believe that it's true and it's not. Right. And then my third one, and the one that I want to hear your opinion on, is what happens when it does essentially produce the truth on its own. By that I mean it's scoured everything that's on the internet, and it's determined that the truth is actually this. What happens then?
Yeah, I mean, I think both. It seems like one of those fears collides with the other, right? One. I think, just a clarification, I do think that there is information put into the system. There's some allowances, which is not what I would prefer, right? Like, I would prefer, honestly, AI to be AI and let it do its thing at this point, rather than having it be censored in some way. Although I understand, right? Like, the apprehension is not just yours and mine alone. It's a international concern of what AI is capable of, and so I think that there are parameters around how it operates so that it doesn't actually, produce all the truth, which on one hand is probably good, but on the other hand, it is kind of scary. I don't necessarily feel that it's a good thing to be censored, although it's not a new thing either, and so you look up, for instance, like, there's some good examples of people asking, a defamatory essay on Donald Trump, and it'll defame its little heart out. But then you ask it to, like, do it on Joe Biden or something, and it just won't. I was like, I can't do that, sorry. And so there are little things like that in which I don't think are obviously aren't right, because we don't want to be steered in any particular way. But again, it's not new. Google has been doing that for years and years and years, and it just is now like.
Sorry to cut you off, but to take it even further back to my Dewey Decimal System, just for all the people that are younger than me, they did that with books.
Fair enough.
We did that. We do that as a species. We decide that this information should or should not be disseminated, and then we hide it.
Right.
It's just scary that with the books, you could find them, right? You could go back to the deep, darkest parts of the library or whatever, right? And then with Google, you almost can't. And now with ChatGPT, it almost feels like no shot.
Right. Yeah. The more use one avenue has for information, the more it's able to be censored. So it's certainly, it's not like it's censor resistant by any means. And so, yeah, no, I think that is of a real concern. But at the end of the day, we don't have a lot of power over that, right? There are some people controlling that information that.
What do you think about this? Is our audience? Are you familiar? You're familiar with Sam Altman?
Yeah. OpenAI, yeah.
So he is OpenAI, and now Elon Musk, who, I mean, let's face it, the guy gets credit, whether you want to say he doesn't, it's right or wrong. He gets credit for Twitter, or X now, which is essentially one platform that fights back on censoring to ensure free speech, right? So I'll just say that the way that the world is saying it. I don't have an opinion on it. Yeah. Elon Musk is suing Sam Altman for running OpenAI in a way that is detrimental to humanity, which is some pretty crazy stuff, right? Like, I don't know how you would do that, but I'm way above my pay grade.
Yeah.
So my question is, and sorry for making it so long, they said at some point that Sam Altman was out because they had produced AGI, artificial general intelligence. And for the listeners out there, essentially that means what? Can you tell me what AGI is and why it might be such a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as what people understand, I think it's about the same thing. It's like this, this kind of intelligence, this artificial, general intelligence, this artificial intelligence that, can almost dictate itself. And I think that's why, for example, if it had a goal of wanting to better humanity, right, AI might have a big difference of opinion, right, and it might be right. One of the great examples of big difference in opinion in terms of like how it perceives help versus how humans perceive help in that area. And one good example is, well, if we want everyone to thrive and prosper, we might build up support systems and we might do this and we might do that. And AI might just be like, well, that takes a lot of resources and that's just like, it does all the calculations and figures out, well, that's not even really possible. And so then it, and it's only using information that it has. And so then it says, well, why just get rid of half the, population. Let's cut them off. Let's throw them on an island. And, it might come to different conclusions than we might because it doesn't necessarily have those, those other emotions of like empathy and whatnot. And so, I think that's a concern. The concern is too, like, even the information it has access to is human driven, and so it's flawed. And another thing is that it does learn from interactions with humans. And this is a funny. I read this study about they were trying to figure out what happens when ChatGPT interacts with its user base over a period of time. And what they found out was that actually its efficiency, its accuracy, and everything about it has actually gotten worse with interactions with humans. It's like,
really?
Yeah, interactions with us has actually made ChatGPT worse, less intelligent.
You are now dumber for having interacted with the humans.
Yeah.
I believe that. I just do. That makes good sense to me.
Yeah.
So are they programming in empathy? Is there a way to do that?
I don't know. I don't think so. Probably not. I mean, you could probably say, well, the goal is to say, well, preserve humans or care about them or whatever. But it's hard. How do you program an emotion? Emotions are a different language, right. And as you would say,
it is a different language.
Yeah.
So I think about this sometimes too. Like, I remember hearing a discussion on this topic when it first kind of became public. Right? And how long ago was it really? A year?
When did it come out? 2022, something like that?
All right, so we'll give it 2 years. We'll give it 18 months.
Yeah.
And the topic was, why don't I just ask it how to make a bomb? Right? And its response was, bombs are dangerous, and so I'm not telling you.
All right.
But now that we're talking about censorship, isn't that essentially censorship?
Oh yeah, definitely. And that's the stuff that, like, I get why it's there, but also, it makes it quite dangerous at the same time too.
So then it becomes up to the humans to say, where is the censorship line, right? And to your point about Biden versus Trump, they've decided at some point that one is okay to be defamed and one is not. So what do you think is the future there? Which side wins out? Is this open AI or is this censored AI?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think everything is already censored to a degree which we understand and a degree to which we don't understand and don't see. And I mean, again, you almost said that it's like a human thing, right? It's a cultural thing. The history, the way we learned it, probably didn't happen in that way, right? Which is why we have those international relationships and some of them not so great. So, I mean, I think it's pretty natural, in terms of like the politics of it. I mean, I'm more of kind of like, you just got to kind of go with the flow, and I don't really have a ton of control over those specific aspects, the censorship or not. But, as far as a tool, I think it's an amazing tool, and it can do a lot of amazing things.
I heard I heard Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, speak on this previous to whatever is going on now. And he brought up something that really blew my mind, because the topic was AI and censorship. And essentially what he said was, what will happen is the smartest minds in this field will move to the countries that allow them to practice their study with the least amount of restrictions. Right. So if America is like, hey, listen, you can do this, like it's back with our LSD and psilocybin, right? America was like, those are illegal, you can't study them here. So where did they go? They went to Sweden because they're not illegal and they could study them. So essentially, then they studied them, and a lot of good or bad or whatever you want to come out of it. But AI is going to do the same thing, right? So people, the smartest minds, and this was his point, not mine, will go to the places with the least regulation. So what his point was as a global community, we need to decide some elements that we can police, that we can work with. Because if there's any outliers, they'll just go there, and then we'll have that anyways.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's a good point, because there are some things that obviously we've been misinformed about, and that's just related to censorship, right? Like mushrooms, for example. There was like big things in, I want to say 70s maybe, like propaganda against mushrooms. So you're saying, like, you take it, you're gonna lose your mind, right? And at the same time, there was studies going on that occurred that were saying, wow, these severe chronic depression, these patients with chronic depression, sometimes had significant improvement after just one dose. And so, like, at the same time, both of those things were happening, and we now know it to be a little far-fetched to say that you're going to lose your mind on mushrooms, and it's just you're going to turn psychotic. Although I think there is a little truth to that, but I think there was fear. There was certainly some sort of fear from someone about that particular avenue, and so that got washed away. And so then now you have this kind of like, although it seems to be changing a lot, but for a long time, you mentioned mushrooms to people, and they're like, oh my God, mushrooms, that's a class 1 drug or whatever.
Yeah.
But you also don't know where a lot of that stuff comes from. There was this is actually really interesting. They know that Russia for a long time had huge misinformation campaigns going on in the U.S. to like divide us, like, culturally. And so I always think it's so there's a name for it. I can't actually remember what it's called, and it's going to come to me like after the podcast. I'm like, God, that's what it's called. But it is essentially what it was. It's like big misinformation campaigns, and they just release
Propaganda.
a bunch of like big propaganda, and they would release it and just let it take hold of the American culture. And it's so interesting how we've been censored and kind of like propaganded for forever. And so I guess I kind of like resigned a little bit to it. Like, I try to do what I can to be informed, but I'm never fully informed, and it's not really something I feel like I can control in a lot of concrete ways.
Oh, absolutely. And this is, goes back as far as before the Dewey Decimal System, which I did look up and came around not too long ago. But yeah, this is what governments would do to their people, as far back as governments existed, right?
Yeah.
And in order to control, right? And it comes down to control. And to bring it full circle back to this AI, what's scary to me is that it is a new level of control. And that control, to me, and maybe I'm jumping to conclusions because I'm a little bit older, is more than the Google, is more control than we went from books to Google.
Yeah.
And now from Google to AI. And there's no way that AI is the last thing. Right? We may be at the pinnacle of human innovation, but it's not the last thing. We even know we're expecting AGI, you know, and then once that happens, who knows? One of the scariest parts to me, and again, I'm not trying to be scary today, but the scariest thing to me, and we can all, well, I'll give you an example after I say it, is it's happening exponentially, right? So this change in our human society is happening exponentially. And a great example of that is video, right? We'll go audio recording. So we'll start with the record player. The record player was around from like we'll just use the 1920s. It was before that. We'll just call it 1900.
Yeah.
For those of us that want to look it up, we'll ask AI afterwards. Right, 1900 to, let's just say, when was the 8-track in place? We'll call it the 1960s. So we'll call it 60 years.
Yeah, late 60s maybe.
And then what came next was the cassette. And that cassette player lasted, let's call it, to the 90s. And then what came next was the CD. And the CD lasted from the 90s to 2010.
10 years maybe.
Yeah. And then what came next was the MP3. It was like a digital file.
Yeah.
And then now it's streaming.
Right.
And that, over that 100 years, it's changed 6 times. 4 of those times has been in the last 20 years.
Right.
Do the same thing with video, right? We're on the podcast, right? We can talk to God back there. She'll probably be able to tell you like how many times the video has changed.
Right.
And then do that again with the scariest one, information.
Yeah.
And that is what's scary to me, is that it's changing so rapidly. We're becoming, no matter how many politicians don't want to admit this, we're becoming a global community, and it's happening overnight.
Yeah.
Once that, now we can interact with anybody in the country, anybody in the world.
Yeah.
Now, like when you pick up the phone and call anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And that's happening so quickly that, couple that with the fears around censorship, couple that with the fears about people just moving to wherever these places are, that they can do whatever they want. It does pose what could be a very scary proposition in the future.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, it certainly seems like some really cool stuff's going to come. Right? Some really life-changing. Maybe we find the best way to live with each other.
Right.
Right? Maybe it tells us that the best way to live with each other is this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think some of the insights are super interesting. You know, you're talking about a mind in which can connect all the dots that no single human, no single group of humans can do, and I find that to be fascinating. And so as much as the concerns are there, in some ways we can't necessarily control a lot of that. And, you know, here I am, I'm utilizing it in ways that I find to be helpful, even if that's just, you know, me saying, I have this thought, it goes something like this, reframe it and retype it in a way that makes sense. And then it types it out, and it's like, it's so beautiful and well said in a lot of ways. And, you know, I think that's really nice. And, you know, the argument could be said, well, you're losing a little bit of the art of writing in that sense, which I think is true, but I'm also not a creative writer. I'll leave that to them. So super interesting stuff. But
what an interesting topic. This is the first podcast that we've done where we essentially took an opposite side.
Yeah.
And didn't know it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's funny.
And it is like one of the more like non-health oriented ones, but to be fair, we never said this was a podcast about health. We
this
said
is just stuff we find interesting. Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I enjoyed this one. Yeah. So go ahead.
Please, yeah. Check us out on Spotify, on YouTube, on ChatGPT.
Well, we still can't. No.
And we'll catch you next time.